Hello, I'm Dr. Fionnuala Barton, the menopause medic, and I am thrilled today to be joined by Dr. Alex. Dr. Alex is an oncology doctor specialising in breast cancer care, and with a particular focus and passion on supporting women after their breast cancer treatment. So today we'll be covering management of menopause and management of health and wellbeing for women who've gone through a cancer diagnosis, focusing mostly on the sort of evidence-based lifestyle strategies that can make big differences for women who are going through these difficult times in their life. So, Alex, I'd really like for you to just explain a little bit more about what it is that you do and why it is that you do what you do.
I'm an oncology doctor working in North London, and I specialize, amongst other things, in breast cancer. Big part of my job is actually looking after women after they completed their intensive treatment for breast cancer. And that includes menopausal symptoms. So I run menopause workshops. I now run CBT workshops as well. And this is where the coaching comes in. So I'm also a coach, and I developed the practice mainly because I observed how important it is for the women to be supported in that transition after they finish the treatment, because it's a difficult time that they often not supported by the medical team as much anymore. That support finishes at some point, and that transition of going back to normal life or whatever new normal is, finding your identity and finding your balance is extremely important. So this is my why, as it were.
And we've talked, well, I talk a lot about the sort of pillars of well-being and lifestyle being a really important part of that. But before we get started and go in more depth, what do you feel are the important sort of components of a well-being program?
So I think the important thing is to understand why it's happening and why is it different for women following treatment of any cancer, not just breast cancer, but any cancer. Secondly, understanding what are the kind of medical, as it were, options, and if there is any, and where to look for the support. And thirdly, as you say, what it is that women can do themselves to help themselves along that journey and that kind of, probably most difficult transition of their lives. And this is where I think we can give women a lot of, as you say, practical tools, often inexpensive tools, but also giving them that sense that they can do something for themselves. It's not all in the hands of the medics. They're in charge, and they can do a lot to improve their menopausal symptoms and help themselves along that transition.
I do get the feeling that it can end up being quite a disempowered situation to be in. And if there are small but accessible and powerful things that we can feel in control of, I feel like that's a really positive thing for people to know and understand. So first of all, can we talk a little bit about exercise? So why does it matter? What kind of exercise should we be thinking about either recommending to women experiencing menopause after cancer? And what do you feel is a good place to start?
I could talk about exercise all day. I'm a huge fan, personally, first of all. And I like to talk about it as movement, because I think
Okay.
exercise in itself can be quite a daunting idea of having to put a gear on, go to the gym, go for a run. And actually, introducing it in such a way that it becomes integral part of your life is very important. And particularly for the breast cancer population of women, I think it's important to recognize that it plays a part in every step of the journey. A lot of women would have not heard about prehab, which is the kind of physio and physical activity that you can do before you even have surgery for breast cancer.
Okay.
And it can make a huge difference into how you recover. We then have the whole kind of realm of rehabilitation after surgery that often is very kind of exercise and movement based. There's a lot of evidence that any physical activity can help with the side effects of the intensive breast cancer treatment, like chemotherapy, for example. It can help with chemotherapy side effects, nausea, fatigue, all those things. And there's a lot of evidence that's showing that helps. And then we've got this kind of period after the treatment, which we are talking about, in this kind of months or years down the line, when we have side effects of medication that we take and the menopausal symptoms. And this is where exercise can be crucial. And not forgetting the late effects of menopause, so the effect on the bones and effect on cardiovascular health. And again, this is where exercise and movement will help you to lead a long, healthy life for years to come. So I think exercise can have a positive effect on all those areas or all those kind of touch points within the breast cancer journey. That is, it's a very big question. I would say that it's better to do less, but more frequently. So it's the consistency that being able to build a consistency is really important. And then thinking of exercise in terms of not just one type of exercise. So yes, you want to support your cardiovascular health, but you also want to support your joints, support your muscles, support your bones, support your mood and general well-being. And it can be a combination of cardiovascular exercise, strength exercise, yoga, and more kind of gentle forms of exercise, or can be just one that you are likely to do most. And for me, a lot of it is actually gardening. A lot of people don't think of gardening as exercise, but actually you do a
I
lot of
do.
movement
Yeah.
and you're outside in the bright light.
And you're grounded. You've got your hands in soil, you're in nature, you're in connection with the earth, which must be another really lovely benefit to that.
And some people don't think about actually the connection with the microbiome of the earth. So I think there
Hugely
is
important.
a lot of benefits of exercise. What you can make of exercise your own is better. I think, something that you are more likely to do regularly, and thinking about a kind of a wider breadth of what you're doing, not just one
Yeah.
type of exercise all the time.
So I really love that, the idea of less but more frequently in order to build consistency, because I think there's a lot of messaging out there, particularly in the kind of wider menopause conversation at the moment, about we must be doing X type of exercise, Y amount of times per week. And if you're not reaching that target, you're not doing well enough. And in many ways, it feels like yet another stick that we can beat ourselves with. But actually, I'm really passionate about calling it movement rather than exercise, so that it kind of makes it more accessible to people. And we recognize that incidental movement, whether it's taking the stairs instead of taking the lift, or whether it's walking to the shops instead of getting in the car, or like you said, actually, recognizing how much physical movement and activity and strength you're gaining in normal day-to-day activities such as gardening. I think that when we think about that, it can feel a lot less intimidating and daunting. But also the idea of starting where you're at, starting small, setting your own targets rather than working towards some arbitrary set of, targets that somebody else has looked up and made up. And I love the idea of variety, but also movement for mood. And I think this is a really important one. Don't get stuck in the idea that you need to be doing a particular type of exercise in order to optimize your health. Actually, what's important is moving in a way that's valuable for you as an individual. And if you're doing something that is helping to lift your mood and make you feel happy, then how do we measure, the benefits of that if it's also helping with your cardiovascular health and your bone and your muscles and things as well? Like, it's about finding the thing that brings you and sparks you that joy, which I think is really important to remember. But also pacing, because obviously after a big diagnosis like a cancer diagnosis and the difficult, traumatizing treatments that involves, actually, you've got to meet yourself where you're at and not put too much pressure on yourself to be, measuring up to perhaps other people who haven't gone through your experience, or even comparing yourself to what you were achieving or managing before your cancer diagnosis and your menopause after cancer. So thank you so much for that. Next question then. What are the other things that you have that you recommend within a toolkit to help with stress management, to help with improving mental health, to help with improving mental clarity, or perhaps seeing things more positively?
So this is a really big question. And two things that, as you're talking, kind of spring to mind. One of them is actually recognizing at what point in your life you are. And I think it's so hard, particularly for women who have finished treatment of breast cancer, this kind of expectation from everyone to just get on with it and get back to normal because it's all done now. And it's not all done. And it's going
Never.
to be a work in progress for some women for quite a long time. So actually, the first step, I think, is recognizing that something really big has happened. Whether you want to call it a trauma or not, I think that kind of depends on how you feel about it. But, it's a breast cancer diagnosis and treatment is a big event in any woman's life. And thinking what it actually means to you is very important. And I encourage most of my patients to reach out for some form of talking intervention if they feel they need support. It is extremely important. And there is a lot of, in NHS, there is a lot of help available if that's what women decide to do. And I recognize that's not for everyone. But even if you're not going to talk to someone, actually recognizing within yourself that this is a big thing that happened and I might need to take some time to recover from it. And then the second thing that came up to mind is actually knowing yourself and knowing what works for you. And I'm a really big advocate for diarying, whatever diary means to you. And people do it differently. People do gratitude diaries. People do little wins diaries, but actually every day thinking about what made me feel better today and noting that down and building that picture of what actually improves my well-being, mental well-being, if that's what we're working with. For me, I know it's exercise, particularly cold water swimming, but it's not for
Lovely.
everyone. It's not for everyone, I completely understand. But there will be small things that make things better. We talked about gardening, for example. And a lot of women who are just so much happier after they've been out in the garden for an hour or two. So knowing what it is that works for you. The exercise is the obvious one. Complementary therapies is another that I often hear from women that they find particularly helpful, especially as they are in that phase of feeling absolutely exhausted. The most evidence there is for acupuncture.
Mm.
We know that it can help with, particularly with hot flushes, because it helps with the thermoregulation. So it helps with the kind of the swinging of the temperatures, but it also helps to dial up the parasympathetic nervous system and the kind of sort of the rest and digest process. But there are other therapies as well. You know, we've got reflexology, Reiki. All those are available in most cancer centers around the country. Some of them are paid, some of them are complimentary. But they can definitely help, particularly in that period of time when women are absolutely exhausted. And then the third thing that I would suggest is social connections. It's one of the pillars of well-being, as you probably know, and I can see it absolutely transforming women's lives in that particular period of time. Our CBT groups actually are in-person groups of 10 women or so, and as much as the CBT itself is a great intervention, what I'm seeing is that what makes women really feel better and help them step into that new period of their lives is actually being part of the group.
Companionship, yeah.
So reaching out for those social connections, whether it's just friends that you want to talk to, or whether it's other women who have gone through the same diagnosis, the same treatment, or are experiencing the same problems, I think can be extremely helpful.
If there's anyone watching or listening to this who is feeling quite isolated and alone and doesn't really know where to turn, are there any sort of national groups or organisations that you work with or would recommend people look towards?
So I'm quite conscious that because I'm based in London, we have a variety of various centres and groups. But I would say actually Breast Cancer Now is a good place to start, because I think the biggest challenge, particularly of looking online, is making sure that the information that you get and the groups you fall into are well informed. So making sure that all the information that is available is well researched and resourced. And Breast Cancer Now is one of those organizations that provides a really up-to-date and well-researched, research-based information. And that's a good place to start. And you can talk to someone there, and from there they can signpost you to other groups if that's what you want.
Great, thank you. Another really great practical tip. Um, I suppose often talk about ways of integrating the parasympathetic nervous system, and you mentioned it then in the context of sort of complementary therapies. Do you think there is a role for sort of mindfulness activities or breathwork techniques in terms of, in those moments where everything's feeling really quite overwhelming, some tangible activities or tools really that we can lean on to help us engage that parasympathetic nervous system, help us to feel more relaxed, whether this is something that we're experiencing after a cancer diagnosis or not? Do you recommend any?
Absolutely. So this is something I talk a lot about to my patients during breast cancer treatment as well as after, because I think some of them actually not just help with, we mentioned mental being and well-being and, some of the other menopausal symptoms, but also when they're going through the intensive chemotherapy treatment and a lot of difficult feelings and thoughts that come up during treatment. So I am a big believer of breath work, and what I try to do is to actually not to make it too complicated, because as you said before, when it becomes yet another chore you have to do, you become resented, and that's not the point. And I'm coming from the place that has a little bit of a research behind it, is that as long as your exhalation is longer than your inhalation, you will encourage the stimulation of the parasympathetic nervous system. So what I advise ladies to do is to inhale for 4, stop for 2, exhale for 6, stop for 2. It's very different to box breathing that a lot of people know.
Yeah,
But that trick of making the exhalation longer has this kind of calming effect on the body. Can you feel that?
I love it. I mean, I rely on this kind of breathing technique a lot, actually, and I wish somebody had told me about it 20 odd years ago. And actually, I think it's something that kind of connects quite nicely with what you mentioned earlier about cold water swimming and cold water exposure, isn't it? Because obviously, a big part of tolerating that cold water experience is being able to control your breath and actually being able to
Absolutely.
relax into it. So the two are kind of very similar, aren't they? So I really like that. Thank you. And actually keeping it really simple, I think, does really help, because when we're in the heat of the moment, it's really quite hard to think about something if it's more complicated.
And I think there's two things that are really important to point out here. One is you have to start small, particularly if you're not familiar with breathing work. 30 seconds of that might be just all you need. And as you get used to particularly that longer exhalation, you can build on that. It can become a minute, it can become 3 minutes, it can become 5 minutes. But start small, because I think if you find it difficult, you're not going to want to do it.
So,
One more thing I just want to mention about the breath, actually, starting doing it when you're feeling calm, because then your body starts learning and your brain starts learning to associate that sort of restful space with that breathing technique. And then you can step into using it when you're feeling stressed, or when the hot flush comes, or when whatever the difficult situation is. If you start doing it whilst the difficult situation is happening, it might not be as effective.
yeah.
So it's all
I
about
love
practice, I'm afraid.
I like that. But what a nice thing to practice. And we almost need a little kind of reminder throughout the day, like do some breath work from time to time.
Absolutely.
All right. So one of the things I use breath work for, actually, if I've got to the end of the day and it's been, a really productive day, or it's been a difficult and I'm struggling to come to terms with it, I'll often, when I'm lying in bed, really utilize those deep breathing breath work exercises in order to just calm and get me into that space where I can then sleep more easily. Now, sleep dysfunction or sleep disruption is a really common problem for many of the patients I see in perimenopause, many of my postmenopausal patients. And I can imagine that is reflected very much in the population of women that you support too.
Absolutely.
So, thinking more generally, what advice would you give in order for us to optimize our sleep in terms of sleep quality, getting to sleep, so sleep initiation, staying asleep for an adequate amount of time?
So it's a very wide topic, and I think that just so much been said about it that I don't want to repeat the whole kind of mantra of sleep hygiene, making sure that your space is adequate for it, it's dark enough, it's cool enough. One tip on the cooling thing I would say is similarly to when the advice is to layer up when you're experiencing hot flushes, you can use the same advice for sleep. So using a few layers of bedding will be better than one thick duvet. And as you get the night sweats and you've got this kind of your duvet off, you're really hot, and then you cool down really quickly and duvet back on because you're shivering, just stopping that kind of on and off thing, you can just take 1 or 2 layers off and it becomes a little bit more manageable. So that's one tip that the ladies tell me that it does help. Then obviously having a nice bedtime routine. We all know about the negative effect of the screens and having the calming activities before the bedtime, trying to cool the body temperature down as well if you can. And paradoxically, a hot bath will actually cool you down because all the blood will come to the surface of the skin and it will cool a lot quicker. But the tip that I've actually picked up with the CBT that a lot of patients tell me they find helpful is what happens when you wake up in the night.
Okay.
Because that is really where, I think for a lot of menopausal women, but particularly for women who suffer with hot flushes with following treatment of breast cancer, that waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning and not being able to go to sleep can really ruin your sleep. And the tip is don't stress about it. So this idea that, we all do it, we wake up, we've got thousands of things going through our head, but the biggest stressor for us often is I'm going to be exhausted the next morning. I will not be able to function. I must go to sleep because I will not be able to function. And what I find personally, and what I found I get the feedback from a lot of ladies is actually just letting go of that thought is the first step of going back to sleep. Nothing keeps you awake more than stressing about being awake.
Yeah. Really
So
good
that's something that I practice alongside the breathing that we just discussed actually.
Okay.
And then the last thing is thinking about what you do first thing in the morning and making sure that you have exposure to some bright light as soon as you wake up or soon after. Whether that is just going out in the garden, having a coffee or a balcony or whatever other space you got, whether it's a short walk, if you're lucky enough to have a dog.
Yeah.
I know, I'm so jealous. So whatever it is, just making sure, what I do is I just basically walk from the station to work. And that's kind of just before 9 o'clock when the sun is already up. and I know that I've got that 15-minute of light exposure.
Yeah.
But
So you've got
what that
you've got
does,
a triple whammy there, haven't you? You're doing a bit of movement, you're
absolutely,
outside, you're getting your sunlight, you're getting some, environmental kind of mindfulness in. I like that. Um,
absolutely.
and yet it's something that a lot of us will overlook because we'll jump in the car, we'll drive, you miss out on what could essentially be a really important, little moment of well-being in your day.
And a lot of people tell me that I have to drive to work. This is what I do. But how about finding a car park space 15 minutes away from work? Could you do something along those lines when you actually have to walk a little bit of the
Mm.
way?
Give yourself more time rather than less.
About the kind of the sunlight in the morning is that it then sets your circadian rhythm going forward. And then the very last thing is thinking about what the naps do. If you are lucky enough, or if you have the luxury enough to having a nap in the afternoon, it can be really quite tempting if you're exhausted, but it will change that sort of sleep pressure you have towards the end of the day. Nap, make sure that's short.
Okay. Is there a sort of maximum duration you would suggest? So if someone's going to go for their nap, would you suggest saying like put an alarm on to wake you up in say 20 minutes?
Realistically, the shorter the better. If I'm really exhausted, I actually use a technique called non-sleep deep rest, which is similar to sort of
Yes.
yoga nidra,
Tell me more about this because I want to learn more about this.
but I practice it and I found it absolutely transformational. And a lot of
Right.
my clients did as well, actually. So the idea is that it's a form of meditation that basically just concentrates on different parts of the body. So you take your awareness to different parts of the body. I listen to the one from Spotify, but they're everywhere. And the idea is that you don't fall asleep, but you become deeply relaxed. And that is enough to reset you. There's one trick, and one trick only, is not to fall asleep. As maybe just set an alarm towards the end to make sure that you have not fallen asleep.
A really helpful, practical tip. Thank you so much, Alex. So you mentioned the CBT technique that when women are waking in the middle of the night, so to just kind of go through that process of not stressing, of telling themselves that it will be okay. What about other cognitive behavioral therapy techniques more generally in order to sort of help us feel well at this stage? And we know that CBTI or CBT for insomnia is a really evidence-based practical tool for insomnia of all different types. But also, there is some strong evidence to say that CBT can really help with vasomotor symptoms as well as the anxiety and the mood shifts that we can often see in menopause. So, could you sort of explain a little bit more about what is CBT and how does it work?
So, first of all, I just want to acknowledge that when we talk about CBT, particularly managing menopausal symptoms, a lot of women feel offended.
Really?
Yes, because there is this narrative that it's a therapy, it's a form of therapy, and therefore maybe we're suggesting that the symptoms are not real. And maybe we're suggesting that they're all in their heads, and therefore we're suggesting therapy. And I really want to sort of debunk that myth because CBT absolutely recognizes that all symptoms of menopause are very physical and very debilitating. But what it does, it basically explores the thoughts, the feelings, and the behaviors that we have around the symptoms of menopause. And the hot flashes, I guess the vasomotor symptoms are the best example of it. How do we feel about it? What do we think while this is happening? And how do we behave? And the first step is actually noticing all that. Because when you notice, you can stop being so reactive to it and actually choose to respond in a certain way. And CBT unpacks that in a very kind of organized, specific manner.
Okay.
And it gives you this choice of reacting differently. So when I talk about CBT to my patients and I kind of invite them to our workshops, I just say that it might just help both your body and your brain to make the hot flashes, in this case, less impactful on your life. And there is a lot of evidence behind it. There's evidence for CBT in various sort of, yes, mental health problems as well, but particularly for hot flashes, there's a couple of really good studies that show it does help. There is a huge benefit. And basically what it teaches women is how to lessen the impact of menopausal symptoms on their life. It does not stop the hot flashes from happening. Sometimes it can reduce the intensity, but basically the biggest difference it makes is on the impact of their life.
Yeah.
And the groups that we're running, I've been trained with the British Menopausal Society, and the groups that we're running are actually use CBT techniques, but there's a lot more to it than just that. There's loads of practical tools. And additionally, as I mentioned, that kind of the group that holds you has a great impact itself as well.
I love that. So, some of the other things you mentioned earlier about diaries and how you feel like they are a really helpful tool, whatever that looks like for people, and also the value of sort of tracking and in particular tracking triggers. So, why does tracking and diarising matter and how can it help us?
So the way I think about tracking is it's all information. And obviously, I'm a doctor, I'll be obsessed with data. But I think, particularly in this kind of period of life when things are difficult and there's transitions that are happening, it's very easy to get lost in a lot of menopausal symptoms that are coming at you at all the same time and the impact they have on your life. And a lot of women come to me with this kind of feeling of just being overwhelmed.
Mm,
And I think what diaries can do, they can help you unpick that and actually understand what's going on. And that's what I do, a lot of work on actually unpicking the symptoms from one symptom from another. Because as we know, those things can build up. You have a hot flush at night, you don't sleep well, you're exhausted, you don't eat well the next day, you don't feel like doing exercise. It all just kind of builds up. So finding sometimes a root cause of finding thing that has probably the worst impact on your everyday life is really helpful. So that's one thing. Secondly, once you've picked that thing, picking up one or two strategies that you use and then tracking on how that particular strategy changes the particular symptom that you're looking to change.
yeah. So, track the
So then
progress.
you're not caught in this thing of doing 100 different things and not actually knowing what's helping.
Yeah.
So it just helps you
I like
unpick
that.
and just be a little bit more systematic about it. Yes, it's a bit of hard work. Yes, there's quite a lot of thinking involved with it and, writing. And there are various tracking apps that you can use or just put notes on your phone during the day. It does not have to be labor intensive, but it allows you to, concentrate on one thing that you want to change, make that change, and then evaluate what the difference it made. And then the second thing that I think is really important is thinking about triggers particularly for hot flushes, and diaries can be really helpful with that. So if hot flushes and vasomotor symptoms are something that really bugs you either during the day or at night, having the thinking about what's been happening or what you've been eating or drinking, an hour to 2 hours beforehand can really pick out what it is that brings the hot flush on. And at about 60 to 70%, as you probably know, hot flushes are related to triggers. And, most common ones are the sort of the hot drinks, the spicy foods, the caffeine. Chocolate is one that I didn't know about. I've learned from my ladies. Did you hear about that? Have you ever encountered someone who told you that
Do you know what? I've never heard somebody articulate that out loud, but I've just reflected that I think chocolate might be one of my triggers.
There you go.
So thank
I
you
just
for
think
pointing that out.
it's fascinating what you can find if you put your mind to
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So thank you so much for imparting all of your wisdom that you have gained from your vast amount of experience working in this area and supporting women in what sounds like a beautiful way. And I would wholeheartedly recommend anybody who is looking for a little bit more support to get in touch with Alex. How is the best way for women to get in touch with you to work with you? Is it via email? Is it via Instagram? And you mentioned earlier that you work, within the oncology department and you work with other organizations doing seminars and workshops and whatnot. How can people get in touch to think about working with you either one-to-one or in that group setting?
So I work in North London. I work at the Royal Free Trust and I work with Maggie's Royal Free. So you can come and find us at Maggie's. I also have an Instagram account, Dr. Alex Menopause Coach with the underscores. And I put out all the invitations for all the Maggie's events there as well. So you can
Okay.
get in touch with me through the Instagram, either through direct messaging or there's my email address on there as well.
Okay, super. And I'll make sure that we tag that so that people can pop over and drop you a follow if needed. So, but finally, before we wrap up, I just wanted to ask a couple of kind of quick fire questions, really, which I hope will be valuable. So, number one, what is the one intervention that you feel makes the most difference?
So I would say, as you probably guessed, would be exercise, but then coupling that with a diary.
Okay.
Because I know that there are some people that exercise makes a huge difference for, and others are not so bothered. Exercise has loads of benefits, but actually to understand what are your benefits of exercise, doing a diary might really help.
What would be the first thing you would suggest somebody gets in place if they're approaching cancer treatment or approaching menopause after cancer, especially when things might feel quite overwhelming?
And that would be reach out. So I know that sometimes, and there's been loads of surveys about recently, women feel alone
Yeah.
and feel let down and feel underinformed. There is information out there. It just might take a while to find it. So your breast care nurse will be your first port of call, but some women report that they're not getting the kind of information they would like to. So breast cancer now actually would be probably the first port of call to find more information, and from there you can build. So there is information out there. It just might take a while to actually get to it.
Okay. And on a similar note, and actually it might be a similar answer, what's the one thing that you would like all women who are facing menopause after cancer to know and take home today?
It's okay to struggle. I think recognizing that this is a huge shift and probably the biggest transition in your life, just recognizing that and naming that is, I think, is the first step to start making changes.
Brilliant.
No one expects
Alex,
you to carry on as normal.
yeah, expect somebody going through this to just crack on and cope with it without needing support. But I imagine that in this kind of hyper resilient, hyper independent female sort of state that we often find ourselves in midlife, it can be quite difficult actually having that vulnerability to
Mhm.
recognize that something is difficult and that it's a struggle. And then, secondly, having the strength to reach out and ask for support if it's not necessarily abundantly clear where to get that from. So, Alex, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for sharing all of that information and kindness. And I can see how much you care about this. It's absolutely lovely. And I hope that we can catch up again and do some more work to help support women experiencing these difficulties in the future. Take care and have a lovely rest of day.